Wife humiliated me at her company party. What I did next left her in total shock. It all started when we entered the luxurious ballroom in downtown Chicago. Rachel, who just minutes before was walking calmly by my side, transformed the moment she saw her research group gathered at the bar. Her face lit up and her tone became almost childish. "Oh, there's my research group," she said enthusiastically. "Try to stay under the radar tonight." Yes, I, naive as I was, interpreted those words as an attempt to make me feel comfortable. Now I know it was the first sign of what was to come. The next warning came when she introduced me to Dr. Adams, the leader of the project she was working on. "This is Daniel, just my husband," she said with a careless gesture, like someone introducing another decoration. Immediately after, she launched into passionately detailing the doctor's work on protein synthesis inhibitors, as if I didn't even exist. Adams, out of courtesy, asked what I did for a living, but Rachel interrupted before I could even open my mouth. "Daniel does logistics stuff. Nothing very exciting. Dr. Adams, tell him about your presentation in Geneva." I felt embarrassment rising to my face as the doctor gave me that uncomfortable smile people use when they don't know whether to console you or pretend nothing happened. The same thing happened over and over throughout the night. Every introduction followed the same pattern. "This is Dr. Rivera. She's revolutionizing oncology treatment protocols. And this is my husband." While she had extensive and detailed praise for them, for me there were only vague phrases, almost like a footnote. I ended up becoming the person who brought drinks and listened from a corner. The most ironic part is that the topics they discussed, pharmaceutical logistics and distribution, were precisely my field of expertise. The moment that broke me came when Dr. Coleman mentioned the difficulties they were having with inventory management at his plant. I started offering some solutions based on my experience, but Rachel interrupted me without even looking at me. "Daniel, can you get me another white wine? A Sauvignon Blanc, not the Chardonnay." And then she simply turned her back on me to continue the conversation. Coleman went silent for a few seconds, puzzled, as if he didn't understand why my input had been dismissed so abruptly. I walked to the bar with the feeling that I had shrunk several inches. While the bartender, a guy about 10 years younger than me, filled the glass, he shot me a knowing look. "Rough night," he murmured. I couldn't respond. I just nodded. When I returned with the glass, Rachel was completely immersed in a conversation about project funding. Her face illuminated in a way I no longer saw when she talked to me. She took a drink without even thanking me or looking away. In that instant, I understood that I was nothing more than an accessory to her. Other guests began to notice the way she treated me. Some tried to include me in their conversations, but that only made the humiliation weigh more. And then the person who explained why Rachel had been so tense all night appeared, Dr. Victoria Price. The moment she entered, the atmosphere changed. She had that presence that makes everyone turn their heads. Firm posture, impeccable elegance, a confidence that filled the room. As the new vice president of operations, she didn't just dominate the scene, technically, she owned it. Rachel straightened up immediately, adopting an almost servile attitude. "Dr. Price, thank you so much for coming," she said with an artificial sweetness I'd never heard her direct at me. "I hope you're enjoying the event." Price's smile was polite, but her eyes analyzed everything like someone evaluating a chessboard. "It's a lovely event, Rachel. I was really looking forward to meeting the team behind our advances," she responded. And then she looked directly at me. "And you must be Daniel. Rachel mentions you from time to time." From time to time. Two words loaded with meaning. She didn't need to say more to make it clear that my wife rarely talked about me. Rachel let out a tense laugh. "Yes, he's my husband. Daniel works in logistics." But unlike the rest, Victoria didn't ignore me. In that instant, something changed inside me. It was the first time all night that someone looked at me as if I actually existed. Rachel had spent the whole night avoiding mentioning my work, so I was surprised when I heard Dr. Victoria Price pronounce the words logistics and optimization. She approached confidently and extended her hand with a smile that had nothing of empty courtesy. "Logistics optimization, if I'm not mistaken. Rachel mentioned that you work with supply chains for manufacturing companies," she said with genuine interest. I froze for a moment. I didn't expect Rachel to have talked about me at all, not after how she'd behaved at this event. But I shook her hand. Her firm grip made it clear she was a woman accustomed to making important decisions. "That's right," I responded calmly. "I mainly work in pharmaceutical and medical device distribution. There's quite a connection with your sector." Rachel looked at me with an expression that mixed discomfort and surprise. Perhaps it was the first time she actually registered the details of what I did for a living. Victoria, on the other hand, sharpened her gaze like someone who had just found a useful piece on a strategic board. "That's interesting," she commented. "We've actually been having distribution problems in our Midwest operations. Our logistics partners seem to be missing significant optimization opportunities." I felt Rachel's tension growing beside me as I began explaining inventory management strategies, just-in-time delivery systems, and cost reduction methods I'd implemented with other pharmaceutical clients. For the first time all night, I was talking about something I thoroughly mastered, and Victoria was listening with real attention, understanding the economic weight of every word. "That's exactly what we need," she affirmed with a tone of authority befitting someone who signs million-dollar decisions. "Your approach to minimizing waste without losing regulatory compliance is very relevant to our current challenges." Rachel tried to intervene, attempting to redirect the conversation toward her research, but Victoria didn't give her space. She kept asking me specific questions about implementation timelines, cost projections, and results obtained in my previous projects. As I talked about efficiency metrics and optimization algorithms, I noticed how Rachel sank deeper and deeper into her discomfort seeing her boss pay me so much attention. At one point, Victoria looked at Rachel directly. "Daniel knows his field very well," she said, letting the phrase fall with weight. "I wonder why you've never mentioned his expertise in our meetings about logistics problems." The question hung in the air like a silent challenge. Rachel reddened and looked for a clumsy exit. "I didn't want it to seem like I was promoting my husband's work," she stammered. "That was ridiculous." She'd spent the whole night exalting other people's achievements. Victoria smiled incisively. "How modest," she said with an intonation that made it clear she understood perfectly what she'd just witnessed. Shortly after, I found myself alone in the rooftop garden of the hotel. The city of Chicago glittered in the distance behind the glass panels, and I held a glass of whiskey trying to process how my marriage had reached the point where my own wife felt ashamed of my achievements. I heard the sound of heels approaching. When I turned, I saw Victoria walking toward me with 2 glasses of wine. Her expression was more serious than in the ballroom. "I knew I'd find you here," she said, extending me a glass. "After that scene, you needed some air." I accepted the drink without quite knowing how to respond to her frankness. "Rachel is just very careful with her professional image. Tonight is important to her." I tried to justify, though it sounded weak even to me. Victoria let out a dry laugh without humor. "Daniel, I've been observing this dynamic for months through how she behaves at the office. She talks about everyone except you. She constantly mentions her colleagues' partners, but when someone asks her about her husband, she becomes evasive or gives vague answers." Her words hit me full force. It was something I'd intuited, but hearing it out loud made it more real. She continued, "She talks about Dr. Adams' husband's law firm, about Dr. Rivera's wife's gallery, even about a lab technician's boyfriend's promotion. But when it comes to you, she changes the subject." I felt a coldness in my stomach. Rachel had been erasing me from her professional identity much longer than I'd wanted to accept. "I saw it clearly tonight," Victoria said with a firm tone. "When Dr. Coleman mentioned inventory problems, you had obvious solutions, and she interrupted you like you were an uncomfortable relative at a family dinner." The comparison was so precise it hurt. It captured exactly how Rachel had made me feel, like someone who needed to be controlled, not valued. Then Victoria pulled a card from her purse. It wasn't the typical corporate one they'd been handing out downstairs, but an elegant cardstock with her personal number. "I want to make you a proposal," she said. "Think about it carefully." I took the card, noticing its weight and sober design. "What kind of proposal?" I asked. Her eyes met mine, and I understood it wasn't just about work. "We need a logistics consultant with experience in pharmaceutical distribution. The contract I'm offering would exceed your current annual salary, and you'd work directly with the executive team, not middle management." The professional offer alone was impressive, but her tone carried an additional charge, something more personal. "And personally?" I asked without thinking too much. She smiled warmly for the first time. "Personally, I find it refreshing to meet someone who's built something solid without needing to dim others' light to shine. Your wife doesn't seem to appreciate that." The phrase hung between us, like an invisible line I could cross or not. "Victoria, I'm married," I said finally. She leaned toward me with a naturalness so calculated that for an instant I thought it was nothing more than a simple casual gesture. But when she lowered her voice, modulating each word with surgical precision, I understood this wasn't just any conversation. "Are you really okay?" she whispered, looking at me with a mix of genuine curiosity and a lucidity that pierced my defenses. "Because from where I'm sitting, you seem like a man who's been made to feel invisible in his own relationship." Her hand, perfectly manicured, slid smoothly until it rested on my forearm. It wasn't an invasive or clumsy contact. It was a calculated, subtle gesture, but personal enough to pierce the emotional armor I'd built over recent years. Men who build their own path, enough, she continued with a firm voice. Don't intimidate women who know their worth. Successful women don't fear competition, they admire it. They don't feel the need to diminish those by their side. They choose them because they're on their level. I looked down at her fingers, resting elegantly on the fabric of my jacket. For a second, I felt an impact that wasn't just physical. Victoria Price had that magnetic presence that doesn't impose itself with force, but infiltrates with calm and stays. It was the first time in years that someone made me feel seen with such clarity. My ex-husband made me feel small, she added, lowering her tone even more, as if confessing something reserved. Poisoned comments about my hours, observations disguised as concern about my salary, insinuations that were really nothing but a constant reminder that I shouldn't shine too much. I stayed longer than I should have because I confused loyalty with love and respect with silence. Every word was a well-directed stab, not because she sought to hurt me, but because it reflected exactly what I'd felt with Rachel for so long. Her habit of downplaying my achievements, her way of presenting me as a simple extension of her image, not as an individual with my own merits. Her ability to present herself to her colleagues as if she were alone, as if I were a filler companion. What are you trying to tell me? I asked, though I really knew. I felt like more than words. She was showing me a mirror. Victoria's thumb traced a slow circle on my wrist, a gesture so small and so precise that it disarmed me more than I expected. Life is too short, she said with icy calm, to waste it next to someone who sees your success as a danger. There are people who prefer to be with someone who shines less so they don't feel overshadowed. I prefer to be next to someone who shines with me. I took a breath, but didn't get to respond. A sharp sound, like a contained gasp, slipped in from the garden entrance. I turned, and there was Rachel, stopped dead, her face distraught. The dim light of the garden highlighted every gesture of her expression. Parted lips, furrowed brows, slight jaw tremor. I saw her trying to process the scene. Victoria leaning toward me, her hand still on my arm, my relaxed posture, and that invisible tension floating in the air. For the first time all evening, I noticed something in Rachel I'd never seen in her. Fear. Not the fear of someone afraid of losing, but of someone who realizes they've already lost something essential. What Victoria offered, respect, attention, and desire, was exactly what Rachel had been denying me for years without even acknowledging it. What happened next was so explosive it became a scene worthy of being repeated, analyzed, and commented on in every company hallway. Rachel didn't just lose control. She did it in front of the entire industry leadership under the elegant lights of a corporate event that was supposed to be impeccable. She crossed the garden with furious steps. Her heels struck the stone with a dry, almost military cadence. Her breathing was agitated, and the sound of conversations around her began to fade as if the entire place was holding its breath. "Get your hands off my husband," she screamed. Her voice cut through the air like a whip. Victoria withdrew her hand with a controlled gesture and stood up with the calm of someone who has faced much greater crises than a jealousy scene. Rachel, on the other hand, was overflowing, driven by months, perhaps years, of accumulated insecurities. "This is totally inappropriate for someone in your position," she continued, raising her voice. "You're harassing my husband at a company event, and I won't tolerate it." A murmur spread among those present. Dozens of faces turned. Some discreetly took out their phones. Others simply stood still, trapped in the spectacle unfolding before them. The accusation floated in the air like an activated bomb. Victoria barely blinked, evaluating every word she'd just heard. She wasn't naive. She knew exactly what it meant for a subordinate to accuse a vice president of harassment in front of witnesses. "Rachel," I intervened with a low but firm voice. "Stop." She spun toward me with a fury I'd never seen in her. "Don't you dare defend her, Daniel." She spat my name with rage. "I saw her. I saw how she touched you, how she whispered in your ear, like an aging predator looking for a younger man." Some people let out an audible gasp. Others looked at each other with discomfort. Rachel had just crossed a line with no return. Victoria, on the other hand, remained standing, upright, projecting serenity and control. "I believe everyone here witnessed a professional conversation," she said with a clear, firm voice. "Nothing more." But Rachel wasn't in a condition to listen. "You touched him," she screamed. "This is harassment, and I'm going to report it to Human Resources on Monday." The crowd grew larger. Some were already openly recording, others whispering in amazement, aware they were witnessing the public collapse of a reputation built over years. Rachel, blinded by anger, didn't even notice she was leaving a visual trail impossible to erase. Victoria smiled coldly and discreetly pointed to the security cameras surrounding the terrace. "Do what you see fit, Rachel. I'm completely at peace with what the recordings will show." The color drained from Rachel's face. She knew in that instant she'd said something she couldn't undo. She'd accused a vice president in front of dozens of witnesses and cameras that don't lie. But instead of stopping, she kept going, finishing herself off. "You think you can steal my husband just because you have power and money?" she roared. "He doesn't want you. Nobody wants a desperate executive who needs married men to feel desired. The faces around were a spectacle in themselves. Some showed pity, others pure discomfort, and some, especially the top executives, had that icy look of someone who knows they're witnessing an inevitable professional fall. Dr. Adams, one of her main allies, shook his head with visible disappointment. Dr. Rivera, clearly uncomfortable, took a couple of steps back as if she didn't want to be associated with what was happening. "Rachel, stop," I said with a firm voice, trying to halt the escalation. But she was no longer conscious of her surroundings. She pointed at Victoria with a trembling finger, her voice broken by fury. "Everyone should know what kind of predator runs this company." And so, under the elegant lighting of the hotel rooftop garden, surrounded by executives, employees, cameras, and unfinished glasses of wine, my wife unleashed with her own hands the detonation that would bury her professional image. Rachel had decided, without thinking too much, that turning her insecurity into a public spectacle was a good idea. The precise instant she falsely accused Dr. Victoria Price, the entire atmosphere of the event hall changed. The music, conversations, and laughter seemed to fade at the same time. Victoria's response was surgical. She turned to her with the icy calm of someone who has watched another person dig their own grave. "I think you should take some time to calm down before saying anything more you might regret, doctor," she said with a firm voice, without raising her tone or losing control. "Your behavior tonight has been recorded from multiple angles, and I suspect human resources will have a lot of interest in reviewing footage of a subordinate making false accusations against a superior at a public event." The message was clear and brutal. There was no need to raise her voice. The entire room understood that Rachel had just ruined her career in front of her colleagues. In a matter of seconds, the color of her face went from furious red to an almost translucent white, as if the gravity of what she'd just done fell on her all at once. Phone cameras did the rest. Short videos began circulating on internal and external networks with biting titles about corporate event scandal and professional collapse live. I watched her in silence, seeing how the woman who'd spent the whole night treating me like an irrelevant companion began to realize she'd just destroyed with her own hands what she'd worked for her entire life. The drive home was 45 minutes, during which she didn't stop making frantic calls. I remained silent in the passenger seat, watching her career crumble in real time through each desperate conversation. Her hands trembled as she dialed familiar numbers: colleagues, influential people in the company, HR representatives. Each attempt ended the same way, with an uncomfortable silence that said more than any words. "Dr. Adams, please, you know I'm not like this," she pleaded in one of the calls, her voice broken. "It was a misunderstanding that got out of control." Even from my side of the car, I could hear the discomfort in Dr. Adams' voice. He explained that videos of her outburst were already circulating and several colleagues had expressed concern about her emotional stability and professional judgment. The next call was to her boss. They'd put her on administrative leave while the investigation into her behavior lasted. "Administrative leave?" Rachel repeated with a hollow tone, as if she didn't understand what that meant. "For how long?" The answer wasn't encouraging. She hung up and immediately dialed her former graduate mentor, desperately seeking an instruction manual for reversing a false harassment accusation. No such manual existed. By the time we got home, she'd already received 3 calls from HR, messages from disappointed colleagues, and an official notification from Victoria Price's assistant, scheduling a formal meeting to discuss her accusations and inappropriate conduct. The castle was crumbling faster than she could process it. "Daniel, you have to help me," she said as soon as we crossed the door, not trying to hide the tremor in her voice. "Victoria clearly has feelings for you. Maybe you could talk to her, explain that it was all an impulse." The irony hit me full force. For years, she'd minimized my work. She'd made me feel like an annoying accessory in her life, and now she was begging me to use that same connection to save her from a disaster she created herself. "Help you? How exactly?" I asked without sarcasm, but with the weight of someone who can no longer pretend not to see reality. "Tell her I'm not like that what I said was out of jealousy, impulse, that I respect her authority, that I never meant to seriously attack her. Please, Daniel, you have to do it." Rachel paced the room like a cornered animal, throwing ideas out desperately. I sat on the couch, watched her in silence, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her as she was, not as the brilliant, self-assured researcher, but as a woman cornered by the consequences of her own actions. "Rachel," I said finally, "you accused a vice president of harassment in front of dozens of witnesses and cameras. You called her a predator and a desperate older woman. You made a false accusation that could have ruined her career if there weren't videos showing exactly what happened." She kept clinging to her justification. "But I did it to protect our marriage. Any wife would react the same if she saw another woman flirting with her husband." "Protect our marriage?" I repeated, feeling something settle inside me, as if I finally saw everything clearly. "When was the last time you protected anything about this marriage? Rachel, when did you last introduce me as something more than just my husband?" husband? When were you interested in my work or showed pride in being with me? The silence fell like a heavy blow. She said nothing, just looked at me, knowing she was asking me to intercede with a woman who, in her mind, I should never have impressed. She was asking me to save her from the consequences of treating me for years as if I didn't matter. She was begging the man she turned into an accessory to now save her from the disaster she unleashed herself. 3 days later, I found myself sitting in Dr. Victoria Price's corner office with a panoramic view of downtown Chicago. Officially, the appointment was to discuss the logistics consulting contract she'd mentioned. However, we both knew this meeting went far beyond technical matters. Her office was exactly as I'd imagined. Floor-to-ceiling windows, elegant furniture that probably cost more than the average car, and an air of silent power without need for ostentation. Victoria wore a perfectly tailored navy blue suit and moved with that ease only people accustomed to being in command have. "I'm glad you called," she said calmly, pointing to one of the leather armchairs in front of her mahogany desk. "After Saturday's drama, I wasn't sure you'd want to continue our professional conversation." I took a seat, noticing every detail of that space. The impeccable lighting, the quality of materials, the environment where my success didn't have to justify itself to anyone. "The consulting opportunity interests me, regardless of what happened with Rachel," I responded firmly. Victoria sketched a smile, pulling out a thick folder full of contracts and financial projections. "I'm glad to hear that, Daniel, because what I'm offering is considerable. It's an exclusive 3-year contract to redesign our entire distribution network in the Midwest, with performance bonuses that could double your current annual income." She slid the documents toward me, and when I opened them, I found myself facing figures that exceeded any negotiation I'd had before with a single client. The magnitude of the project was impressive, coordinating supply chains for 17 manufacturing plants, implementing state-of-the-art inventory systems, and establishing distribution partnerships capable of completely transforming their operational model. "This is incredible," I murmured as I read the technical requirements, aware it was the type of challenge I'd been waiting for my entire career. And I looked up. "But I have to ask, is this a legitimate deal, or is there something more behind what happened with Rachel?" Victoria leaned back in her chair, adopting a more serious tone. "Daniel, I don't mix business with personal feelings. This contract exists because our current logistics partner costs us millions every year through inefficiencies. Your experience is exactly what we need to solve it." She paused for a second, looking at me directly. "But I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't like this to allow us to work together more closely." Her frankness disarmed me. After years of passive-aggressive communication from Rachel, that clarity was almost disconcerting. And deep down, something inside me reacted. "What kind of opportunities?" I asked, though I already intuited the answer. Victoria stood up elegantly and walked around the desk until she was in front of me, leaning against the edge. Her expensive perfume filled the air, and the distance between us reduced to barely a few inches. "The kind of opportunities where we build something together, professionally and personally," she said with a low, controlled voice. "A place where your intelligence is valued and not minimized, where your success adds to mine instead of threatening it." Her hand rested on my shoulder, repeating that gesture that at the gala had unleashed Rachel's fury. But this time there was no audience, just us. "Rachel doesn't deserve you, Daniel. She spent years reducing you to feel bigger. That's not love." Her words hit me with force because they described with precision what I'd felt but had never managed to express. It wasn't a relationship of mutual support, but a mechanism to control and minimize. "Victoria, this is going very fast," I said, though I didn't move her hand away. "Really?" she responded, leaning in a little more. "Or have you simply moved so slowly for so long that a normal pace seems rushed to you?" Her voice became more intimate, caressing each word. "I know what I want, Daniel. I want someone who challenges me intellectually, someone who's built something with their own hands, who doesn't need to tear others down to feel successful." Her thumb grazed my jaw softly, and I felt an intense mix of desire and vertigo, a spark I hadn't felt in years, a sensation of being truly seen and desired by someone who operated at a level of power and ambition similar to mine. "And Rachel?" I asked, trying to maintain some clarity. "The investigation, her career." Victoria smiled with cold, calculated confidence. "Rachel made her choices on Saturday. The investigation will show she presented false harassment accusations against a superior. She showed inappropriate conduct at a corporate event and evidenced questionable judgment that will call into question her ability to continue in her position." The clinical and precise way she described Rachel's imminent fall should have affected me more. However, I found myself surprisingly distant. Then her hand rose to my nape, tangling in my hair with electric softness, and she whispered, "You and I will build something extraordinary, an alliance that transforms pharmaceutical logistics and a relationship between two people who understand and celebrate each other's success." She leaned in even closer. Her lips were barely inches from mine. "I have a penthouse 20 minutes from here," she said with a low, precise voice. "We can continue this conversation in a more private place and discuss the details of this potential partnership." The proposal was on the table, and in that instant, I knew I was standing at a crossroads that would mark the course of my life. I could stay beside a woman who for years had made me feel invisible, or accept the opportunity to build something with someone who from day one valued me as a man with talent and potential. 6 months later, I found myself standing next to Victoria Price at the annual Pharmacon Summit in Boston, wearing a custom-tailored suit that for the first time felt made for me. Around me, industry executives chatted animatedly while Victoria introduced me as her brilliant partner, not just in business, but also in life. Sometimes I have to remind myself this is my reality, not an elaborate fantasy to escape the years of emotional mediocrity I lived with Rachel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced with a firm smile, "I want to introduce you to Daniel Mitchell, the logistics genius who revolutionized our distribution network and generated over $12 million in operational savings this year." As she placed her hand on my arm, I couldn't help but remember that night when that same gesture triggered Rachel's public collapse. The difference between how Victoria showed me off and how my ex-wife used to introduce me was abysmal. Rachel introduced me awkwardly, as if apologizing for my existence. Victoria, on the other hand, spoke of my achievements with genuine pride, as if exhibiting trophies that excited her. My consulting firm, since I began collaborating with Victoria's company, tripled in size. We expanded operations to medical device and biotechnology logistics, and now I'm one of the most sought-after specialists in pharmaceutical supply chain management. The contract Victoria offered me was more than legitimate. It was the springboard to professional success I always knew I could reach, but which for years no one encouraged or celebrated. 3 months ago, we moved in together, and living with someone who applauds my advances instead of belittling them has been like breathing again after years of holding my breath without realizing it. Victoria asks me details about my projects, proposes ideas, analyzes strategies, and treats my opinions as valuable contributions, not annoying interruptions. I remember a recent dinner with investors when she said, "The expansion of the Portland plant was Daniel's innovative approach to the inventory system. His model will serve as a reference for our entire West Coast operation." In that moment, I found myself speaking with a confidence I hadn't allowed myself before, occupying space in the conversation as someone who finally doesn't have to apologize for being good at what they do. The separation from Rachel closed last month. To her surprise, she received much less than she expected. My income had grown so much during our separation that the asset division clearly favored me. Her career also never returned to what it was after the harassment accusation she herself provoked. After the investigation, she was transferred to a small research facility in Wisconsin, forced to complete sensitivity training and carry a formal reprimand that will follow her the rest of her professional life. I heard from acquaintances that she can't adapt in that place. Her reputation precedes her, not as the promising researcher she was, but as the person who made false accusations against her superiors. "She keeps asking if you ever talk about her," Dr. Adams commented at a recent conference with a gesture of disapproval. "She insists you two had something special and one mistake destroyed everything, calling systematic belittlement and a public collapse that affected my professional life. A mistake shows she hasn't understood anything. Still, all I feel today is distant sympathy for someone who had everything and lost it by not knowing how to value it." Victoria and I plan to announce our engagement next month, at the same gala where Rachel publicly humiliated me exactly 1 year ago. There's something almost poetic in the symmetry of that scenario. "Are you nervous about seeing Rachel's old colleagues again?" Victoria asked me last night as we reviewed the guest list on the balcony of our penthouse overlooking the city. "Not nervous," I responded, pulling her toward me. "Grateful. If she hadn't shown who she really was that night, I'd probably still be trapped in a relationship that made me small." Victoria kissed me with the passion of someone who never doubted my worth. "Her loss, my gain," she whispered against my lips. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a shadow in someone else's story, but someone writing their own path. Rachel tried to contact me a couple of weeks ago through LinkedIn, seeking a conversation about closing cycles and understanding what happened. I didn't respond, not out of resentment, but because there are chapters that don't deserve reopening. Today, I have a life that doesn't revolve around begging for recognition. I have voice, space, and a partner who never tries to minimize who I am. Tomorrow, Victoria and I will officially present our expansion into European markets. She'll introduce me as the strategic mind behind the company's new stage. What was once a silent role is today a seat at the main table. I don't need validation from my past to know what I'm worth. I see it in every decision I make, in every step I take beside someone who respects me without conditions. And when I look at that gala stage, I won't think about what I lost with Rachel, but what I gained by leaving her behind.